Okay, good afternoon everyone and welcome to our third Brexit seminar in partnership with InterTradeIreland. My name is 𝗤𝗣𝗟𝗔𝗞𝗘𝗥𝗦. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of 𝗬𝗣𝗘𝗔𝗞𝗘𝗥𝗦 Chamber of Commerce and Trade. I'm delighted to join you this afternoon from our office in Granite Exchange in Newry. Today's webinar will focus on the theme of transport, logistics and ports. I'm joined by Seamus Leheny, Logistics UK, Alistair Eagles, Seatruck Ferries, and Kieran from Warrenpoint Port. Gentlemen, you're very welcome. Over the last few weeks, there's been real interest in the Chamber's Brexit webinars, and today is no different with over 130 people registered for the event. With just over 3 months to go to the end of transition, there are still questions that businesses need answers to. Last week's surprise intervention from the UK government with their internal market bill has not helped the atmosphere or indeed trust between the UK and their EU counterparts. Today is about getting answers to some of the issues, but also it's about ensuring as businesses you're making sensible precautions ahead of the end of the transition period, even if this leads to a period of uncertainty. Our session today is supported by InterTradeIreland, and we will be joined at the end of the session by their Brexit manager, 𝗣𝗣𝗘𝗥𝗦, to give us an update on the support available to businesses. I will ask our panelists for their own perspective on the issues, and then I will put your questions to the panel. There are, at the bottom of the toolbar, you will see the facility for a chat to put questions to the panel. And if you could feed these through to me in the initial 10 or 15 minutes as I'm having a conversation with each of the panelists, I can then forward those on to the panelists and ask them for their views and the response. So please use that email chat facility. I know there's a lot of politics going on at the moment, and people will be keen to get into a political discussion, but I suppose what we're trying to do today is find the answer to 3 questions, to confirm what we do know, to identify the areas that still a lot of uncertainty around, and then finally to give answers to things you can do at the moment. Even in this period of uncertainty, there are things you can do to prepare your business for what may happen post 1st of January. So, okay, let's get started, and I'm going to kick off with Seamus from Logistics UK, or formerly the Freight Transport Association, which has been central to representing the interests of the transport industry on Brexit. Seamus, from your perspective, where do we stand now?
Colm, I suppose it all comes down to, in the last week really, the internal markets bill. That's really put a cat amongst the pigeons, and in some way really set back the levels of clarity that we'd achieved probably in the last 6 months. So where we stand now, I suppose what we do know, HMRC have said, okay, we realise there's going to be significant change for how we trade between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. So they agreed to fund a package. It's going to total about £355 million, and this is the Trader Support Service. So that service will go live from the 1st of January here. And HMRC are funding it, but it's a private consortium have won the bid. So the tender went out in August. The tender was awarded, from my understanding, last Monday. But it's not been announced yet because it has to be a 10-day cooling off period, just to give those who are unsuccessful an opportunity maybe to appeal that. So we should know hopefully by the end of the week, obviously finalised, confirmed who will deliver that. But ultimately what it means, it'll be a free-to-use service. So there will be on-the-ground support and guidance from an organisation to help people through the new formalities we're going to face. But also I think the biggest fundamental change in this will be this service will also carry out and complete and submit all the customs declarations for businesses. So if you're going to be faced with an import declaration for moving goods, say from Liverpool to Newry, the Trader Support Service will do this for you. You'll still, as a trader, you'll still have to give the data, the tariff codes, the commodities, etc. But at least you won't be burdened with the cost of having to do this, which was a major concern of ours. Now, the Trader Support Service, it's only going to be initially for a 2-year period. And the funding for this amounts to £200 million. And then in addition to that, there's £155 million that the government's going to throw at the development of software And what they want to do in that 2-year period, they're going to streamline, digitize, and make it faster, the ability to submit customs. So I think what we want, the way I describe the Trader Support Service, it's a bit like stabilizers on a child's bike. It's there just to give us an initial push off, a little bit of confidence. And then when the 2 years is up, through that development of software and IT, they're going to say, okay, guys, you should be able to do this yourself. Now, the big thing is in 2 years' time, we may not be at that point. We may not be ready to take the stabilizers off. So we might have to go back to HMRC and say we need a bit more funding, maybe for another year or two, just until we're ready for that. What we'll need, the IT system that HMRC are also developing at the moment, it's called the Goods Vehicle Movement Service. This is an IT system that all operators who are moving goods across the IRC will have to link into. Now, transporters will probably use an app on a smart device to upload a lot of the data HMRC. And the way it's going to work, if I can basically summarize it as easy as I can, sometimes these things can't, is that the driver will go to, let's say, the pickup point, let's say in Birmingham, to lift a consignment. The customer will then give the transporter the import declaration reference. So that import declaration has to be submitted before the goods will ship from GB to Northern Ireland. So the driver has that reference. He then gets the safety security declaration reference, which is something I know Alistair will probably pick up on that for every consignment. And then you put in the transit details. So the port of departure, the port of arrival in Northern Ireland, and the times. And when you input all that data into the software, it gives you what's called a goods movement reference, a GMR. So when the driver arrives into Seatruck reference, they upload that to the GVMS system, and that GVMS will tell them automatically if that load is authorized to board the vessel for sailing to Northern Ireland. So suppose the concern with HMRC is we want to make sure we have this right, because the last thing we want is loads being refused boarding on ships when they're leaving GB. We want everything arriving at port to be cleared to get there. So that's where we are with the IT systems and the documentation on that. Probably the last point, if you are moving goods from continental Europe to Northern Ireland, you will raise what's called a transit accompanying document. Now, a transit document costs between 40 and 60 euros. And the benefit of this, it means that if you're taking in, whether it's a full load or one pallet, let's say you're lifting a pallet of goods from the Netherlands to come to Newry, that pallet will arrive into GB. The transit accompanying document will prove that this pallet is going to Northern Ireland, which is still within the single market. So it clocks in at Dover, and then it clocks out again at Liverpool. And what it means, those goods will travel without the requirement for a customs declaration or paying any tariffs. It's showing that the goods won't be staying within GB. So that's one of the benefits of the protocol. It means as a business in Northern Ireland here, you can trade freely among the EU 27 without any customs declarations or tariffs on that. So hopefully that answers that question.
And I suppose the important point when you mentioned the Trader Support Service before we go on to the next question is it's vitally important that people are registered for that. They can register now, isn't that correct? Yeah, HMRC have a website. Simply if you just put into Google, put in the HMRC Trader Support Service, you'll get there. And there's actually a point on the website to register your interest. So when you put in your contact details there, they will keep you up to date with the developments for that, and obviously making sure that you're in the loop with all the news, and then obviously becoming a user of that system as well. What would you say, Seamus, are the outstanding issues at the moment? I don't know whether you picked up that question, Seamus. I was asking you, what would you say are the outstanding issues at the moment? The outstanding issues, you know, I'm sure Kieran will go into them. It's probably around the level of checks, the risk analysis on goods arriving into Northern Ireland, what's deemed of being at risk of it entering the EU. And that's probably one of the reasons for the Internal Market Bill, because the bill wants to make sure that there's frictionless trade within the UK internal market. If the EU suggests that certain commodities or trade flows are at risk, and therefore maybe there's tariffs to be paid and various customs declarations,
that's probably runs contrary to the Internal Markets Bill. So that needs to be rectified. We need on the SPS, on the movement of agri-food goods coming into Northern Ireland, that's not been raised in the Internal Markets Bill, and from our understanding, it's a given that they admit that that will be progressed. What we still need to hear more about is probably the infrastructure and how the checks will take place, and obviously the IT system as well that will monitor the movement of goods from GB into here. And then we're looking at cabotage as well. I know, like for an area around, you know, the Newry and South Down area, it's that ability based in Newry to travel in to the Republic of Ireland or go to the continent and carry out those cabotage movements as well. We still need to get some level of detail on that. What we are pushing for, and we had a meeting back at the end of July with Simon Coveney in Belfast, we are looking for some type of bilateral deal for the island of Ireland, where hauliers in the Republic and hauliers in the Northern Ireland have free access across the island, so you can carry out unlimited cabotage and movements. And that's something, probably that's a side deal. And in the grand scheme of things where we are now at Brexit, it's probably quite low down. But the key thing we would always point out, the protocol ensures the ability to move goods across the island of Ireland, but it doesn't cover actually about how we physically move them through the trucks. So we need that sorted as well.
Yeah, and I think that is an important thing. Before maybe I just move to Alistair, I mean, are there any sort of do's and don'ts that you would recommend to hauliers at this point in time? Obviously, we pick up some of the questions when we get to the panel session.
The do's, obviously, you know, for any... Yeah, I can hear you. Probably any companies at the moment, you know, make sure you've got your EORI registration. If you're going to be involved in any customs formalities, you need that. So just double check you are registered on that. Make sure you're registered for the Trader Support Service. And anything basically, you know, I would say, you know, anything the Chamber or InterTradeIreland are doing with regards to just acquainting yourself with those customs formalities. What is an import declaration? What does it look like? What's a safety and security declaration form? What does that look like? A safety security declaration will have to be completed for every load crossing the Irish Sea. So just about acquainting yourselves at the moment, just so there's no surprises for us. But I would hope and anticipate the Trader Support Service should cover a lot of that. And I think between ourselves and some of the other bodies out there, we'll be putting forward a lot of these educational matters as well.
Okay, Seamus, thanks for now, and we'll get back to you when we're putting questions to the panel. I see some questions coming through already, so if you're keen to get your question asked, please email them through to me on the chat facility at the bottom of the screen. Our next guest is Alistair Eagles, Chief Executive of Seatruck Ferries. Seatruck Ferries are the only dedicated freight company on the Irish Sea, operating a number of routes from Heysham and Liverpool to Dublin and Warrenpoint. Alistair, the routes across the Irish Sea are vital for our industries. From a ferry company perspective, what do you see as the challenges?
I think, first of all, we kind of start talking about Brexit and we forget about the virus, and the virus is still a huge challenge for the ferry industry as a whole. We're not involved in passenger transportation, but any of our competitors involved in the shipment and passengers, you know, please don't forget passenger numbers are still very, very low. And those operators are still really struggling with the financial implications of the virus. I know we need to move on and talk about Brexit, but there's almost a perfect storm for the operators that operate freight and passengers combined. When it comes to kind of Brexit, all the way through, my kind of cry has been the same, that businesses can usually cope with anything. Businesses are quite resilient, but we just need to know what we have to do and when we have to do it. The when is a bit more clear now, but the exactly what is still less than clear, particularly with Northern Ireland. In terms of Dublin and our routes into Dublin, it's a lot clearer what's required, and that's fairly well established now. But Northern Ireland is still kind of a bit of a question mark. What we have done as ferry companies is we've all decided on the Irish Sea to have the same stance when it comes to how we move goods. So whichever ferry company you use on the Irish Sea, whichever route you use, although there'll be different documents and different abbreviations and whatever, the basic principle will be the same. And the principle will be the kind of pre-lodgement principle, meaning before you go to port, you must have done all the necessary documentation required for that load, depending on where it's going to, where it's come from. And those documents need to have been pre-lodged, and you need to have gained one of these single reference numbers. It's called different things in different jurisdictions, but effectively it's like having a big envelope, and everything to do with that envelope goes inside the envelope, and then there's a number on front of the envelope. It's not an envelope, but in real terms. And that number you've got to give to the ferry company. And when you turn up at port, the ferry company will then verify that that number checks out with that load, will be linked into the various jurisdictions. And if that unit, for whatever reason, doesn't match up, if there's a problem, it's not that the unit won't be allowed to board, it's actually the unit will not be allowed access to the terminal. We'll turn the unit round and send it back out again. So it's really, really important that people just don't turn up at ports. It's really important that people pre-lodge, get that number to the ferry companies, and make sure when the drivers turn up, it's the right unit, it's the right number, because they just won't get access to any of the terminals on the Irish Sea unless that happens. And that includes safety and security documents, not just customs documents. And the safety and security document will be the responsibility of the haulier too. So, you know, we're changing our conditions of carriages in the ferry companies to say that, you know, you must have done these documents before you turn up. And then there's a couple of other things that are worth noting. Some movements, transit movements, some foodstuff movements require original documentation to travel with the vehicle. And again, that original documentation will not be handled by the ferry companies. So if you've got original documents that need to travel with a vehicle, if it's a driver accompanied vehicle with a driver boarding the ferry, that's relatively easy. The driver can hang on to them. If it's an unaccompanied trailer, the type of units that we specialize in, where the trailer ships on its own, you've either got to have somewhere for those documents to go on the trailer, a trailer documents tube or something, or they've got to go in the back of the unit. But the ferry companies won't be taking those documents into their care and putting them in a ship's bag or anything like that, just to be clear. And then particularly with Ireland, with Dublin, there are some particular changes that are going to impact particularly the foodstuff industry. So if you're shipping anything that goes into your mouth into Ireland, you've got to actually lodge the documents relating to foodstuffs 24 hours before that unit arrives in Dublin port. And again, that's quite a big change compared to how goods move at the moment with the very short kind of lead times. So, you know, there are kind of some basic principles. And the key thing I'd say is it's a pre-lodgement model. You've got to get your documentation done before you arrive in the port. If that doesn't happen, you won't gain access to the terminal. And that will be, you know, across the Irish Sea, all operators, all routes, all terminals. So that's the key message, because there are still plenty of operators turning up at ferry terminals even without a booking. You know, people will turn up on some routes without a booking and then decide which operator to use when they get to Holyhead or when they get to Kieran or whatever. So, you know, that pre-lodgement thing is really important. With Northern Ireland, there are some particular challenges at the moment. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of, you know, goods moving from GB to NI. It seems pretty likely that goods moving out of Northern Ireland will not be subject to any checks whatsoever. But there's some obvious issues, particularly on routes like Warrenpoint, where there'll be some people using Warrenpoint to gain access to Ireland. Probably 30% of what we move into Warrenpoint at the moment turns left in Newry and goes over the border. And somehow we're meant to identify which loads are at risk of entering the Irish market. Not quite sure how that's going to happen, because surely every load anyone ships into Northern Ireland has a risk of entering Ireland. And, you know, there's just the big question marks about how that trader support scheme works. And although there is no cost, I would be hesitant to say there isn't any cost to operators, because you've still got to administer that scheme. That's still going to take manpower. And through all of this, you know, the challenge for hauliers in particular is this is a high volume, low margin game, and this is going to add cost to everyone's kind of cost base. And if people are quoting for loads next year, you know, please take account of that and be adding on costs for customs declarations or the administration involved in doing that. But for a ferry company, you know, one of the biggest concerns, and where we all started out, was the concern of congestion. We don't want our ports being so clogged up that we can't load ships. That's why we're not letting stuff into the port unless it's done correctly. Of course, the big question then is all that traffic that turns around on day one, where does that go and park? Does it go and fill up Warrenpoint town centre? Does it fill up Dublin Port to the extent that Dublin Port becomes gridlocked? And the same for Liverpool and Heysham, you know. So I guess there are some things that are quite clear. There are some things that are not so clear.
I suppose Seamus talked about the importance of registering now for the Trader Support Service, and you've talked about the importance of making sure all your documentation is in the right order, irrespective of which ferry company you're going to be using. You're going to need that. And you've probably touched on my next question, which is about those arrangements that have been in place. But maybe if I could pick up a question on capacity on the Irish Sea. Do you see any change in the capacity on the Irish Sea as a result of either a deal or a no deal scenario?
I think the first thing to say about Brexit is the one thing that doesn't change under any Brexit model whatsoever is the geography. So England and Wales and Ireland and Northern Ireland and Scotland will still all be in the same place on the 1st of January. So I believe we're going to remain huge trading partners of each other at time infinitum, because we are simply the closest markets to each other. And there may be a slight increase in continental Europe directly into Ireland traffic, but the lead times are completely different. So, you know, at the moment you can order something now, it can be picked this afternoon, it can be in Newry tomorrow morning, you know, and you can't do that from any of the kind of European ports, if you like. So the geography doesn't change. So I think we're still going to be huge trading partners of each other. Capacity wise, it's going to be interesting in the early weeks. I think there'll be ships sailing at much lower utilizations than they should do, because we'll be turning stuff around. How do we then catch back up? We're obviously going to see a huge volume spike in kind of November and December, as we saw previously on the kind of pre-Brexit spikes in March and October last year. So I think people are going to try and beat the deadline. So, you know, we're gearing up for a busy kind of winter. But then in terms of what happens next, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with some of the combined passenger and freight operators. May largely depend on what actually happens with the passenger market, which isn't Brexit related at all, but related to the virus. We're certainly looking at our capacity, and I think there could be some potential changes. So if you want an obvious example, there's quite a lot of Northern Irish exporters at the moment using Dublin as their exit port into GB. So people, particularly foodstuffs, travelling down to Dublin, heading across the water to deliver to Manchester, London. And there are good reasons for that. There's maybe more choice in Dublin of operators than there is in, say, Belfast. The road mileage from Holyhead and Liverpool is less than the road mileage from, say, Cairn-Ryan. So good reasons that people do that at the moment. But if in the future you've got the choice of exporting your goods through Northern Ireland to GB with absolutely no checks and no hassle and, you know, no grief at all, or you can go through Dublin and have loads of grief, people are going to default to the path of least resistance. And I think we're going to see some of the traffic that's currently moving through Dublin Port, particularly export Northern Irish traffic, instead moving through Larne, Belfast and Warrenpoint. So I think we're going to see maybe a growth in traffic using Northern Irish ports, a decrease in Dublin. But overall, I don't see the overall market changing that much. And again, silly example, we ship the Guinness traffic out of Dublin into Liverpool. Post-Brexit, I think Guinness is still going to be brewed in Dublin, and I think Guinness is still going to be drunk in England. Yeah, and you could say the same for Kellogg's cornflakes or baked beans in the other direction. So, you know, I kind of think the stuff is still going to move. There may be some changes, more going through Northern Ireland, but I see the overall market being similar. And if more ships are needed, we've certainly got access to other ships that we can bring back from the charter market and add them into our own service. So if we needed to have more ships in Warrenpoint and less in Dublin, we could do that very, very quickly. And as a freight operator, we haven't got all the kind of passenger considerations in changing routes and moving ships very quickly.
Thanks for that, Alistair. A very interesting insight into potential shifts and changes in trade flows across the Irish Sea. So Alistair, for now, thank you. I think our final panelists will be interested in some of those potential opportunities, and that's Kieran Grant from Warrenpoint Port Warrenpoint Port has an important strategic location in Carlingford Lough, providing freight services, as Alistair alluded to there, for customers both in Northern Ireland and the South, with a twice daily route to Heden and irregular services to other ports in GB and Europe. It's Northern Ireland's second largest freight port. Kieran, you're a member of the Chamber, and I know the port has been very actively involved in contingency arrangements. Could you explain how the port plans to manage trade post-transition?
Okay, afternoon, Colm, afternoon everyone. So first of all, I suppose from a customs perspective, Warrenpoint Port is already a point of entry, or what they call a border control post, and has been for years. It's just since 1992 and the European Act that it's only really been required for goods that are being imported from the rest of the world. So currently that's only 5% of our trade, or about 40 vessels a year, and that might be timber from Russia, maybe animal feed from Canada, or steel from Turkey as examples. So what we've been doing over the last 18 months or so, the first thing is, from a customs perspective, we've applied for and be given what's called a customs comprehensive guarantee, and we're also currently looking at becoming an authorised economic operator. And these are sort of kite marks to ensure that our supply chain is secure and meets EU and UK standards. We're also currently working with HMRC to ensure that our current approvals, and that's for wharfage and temporary storage, remain in place. And basically with a combination of those, it means that goods will be allowed to be landed into Warrenpoint Port, and they can temporarily store there until such times as they're custom cleared. And we would have cargo agents in the port here who liaise basically remotely with HMRC Customs to do that. But as I said, it's only for really 5% of our volume currently. There are also currently SPS checks required for some of our agri-plant-based cargoes, timber, animal feed. But again, that's currently only for rest of world imports, as I already mentioned, and that's 5% of our total trade. In terms of the port's location in Carlingford Lough, it's a narrow site. It's 60 acres. There's really no room for expansion. So space has been a real of paramount importance to us in getting ready for Brexit. And I suppose in advance of Brexit Mark 1, let's call it, which was 31st of March last year, the port invested about £500,000 in to create an additional temporary storage space for trailers to allow for additional dwell time before any checks that may have been required were carried out. And thankfully that space is currently being used by our biggest customer, Seatruck. In late 2019, early 2020, with the assistance of the Department of Infrastructure, we basically got a project, a grant-assisted project, to try and create 6 acres of additional space, open space in our existing footprint. And really that was done by removing redundant buildings and sheds and just improving our internal roadways. And thankfully that's been ready just at the end of February, start of March. It was just in time for the impact of COVID, where basically ships kept still coming in, but the cargo stopped going out of the port. So the port was bursting at the seams 6 months ago, but thankfully trade has started to move on again. I suppose then there was the release of the NI protocol paper at the end of May, and since the start of June, we've been heavily involved in meetings, particularly with DERA officials and other government bodies around the requirements for a dedicated SPS inspection facility at the port. And this is a requirement because, as Seamus and Alistair have already alluded to, Northern Ireland will remain in the single market for goods, and that's to prevent a hard border. So there will be a requirement for agri-foods goods coming in from GB into Northern Ireland to have SPS checks done. And that's to ensure the security of agri-food products entering the EU from GB post January 21. So the port will obviously provide an area in the port to allow these checks to be done, because, and it's to secure existing trade flows, because 80% of the port's trade, tonnage-wise, is between GB and NI, and basically it's our biggest customer, Seatruck, but there's also, we have a twice-weekly container service between GB and NI, between Warrenpoint and Bristol, and we have some animal feed imports as well as scrap meat exports. So, and at least half of that 80% is really imports from GB into NI. And as Seamus alluded to there, hopefully the trader support service will look after the sort of documentation side and the customs side of things. However, there will be, as we see it, there will be physical checks still need to be carried out on a certain percentage of those trailers or unitized cargoes coming in from GB. And that those checks will have to take place in purpose-built facilities that can allow for storage for ambient, chilled and frozen products. And this all is supposed to be in place by 1st of January 2021, which is only 16 weeks away. I suppose the port has, as I said, been working with their officials on this. And there has to be, we say there's no other option, but there will have to be some sort of checks. But there's, as of today, there's no real formal approval for a physical building to be put in place. However, we did, you know, there will have to be some contingencies measures put in place to allow goods to flow freely from the port after the 1st of January 2021. I suppose that's our key aim, is to ensure that trade continues to flow freely after the transition period ends.
I suppose that's there's still probably some politics around those checking facilities, and my aim today is to try and focus on what we do know, but it's good to know that, you know, arrangements are being made, and hopefully the politics will sort it out that will allow you to do that. Just very briefly before I start taking questions for the panel, and Alistair talked a little bit about the trade flows across the Irish Sea, and do you see opportunities for Warrenpoint in that, Kieran?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to put it in context, I suppose Warrenpoint port is the second biggest port in Northern Ireland, and it accounts for 12% of imports and exports through NI, and it is really a freight-only port. That equates to about 3.5 million tons a year, or 1,000 vessel movements, and that's split approximately just over 55% import, 45% export. And already alluded to there, the east-west trade is crucial, and it represents 80% of our cargo movements on the seaward side. But equally as important is that you know, the origin or destination is 40% either, you know, started life or ended life in the Republic of Ireland, and that's again as a consequence of where we are located, halfway along the key economic corridor, north-south corridor on the east coast of Ireland. So from Warrenpoint's perspective, first of all, we have seen some maybe timber cargoes lost or steel cargoes lost, because importers are concerned that if there is a hard border, they want to make sure that the goods will still be allowed to go to the Republic of Ireland. But if this uncertainty is removed and there is no hard border, then hopefully we will see some of those cargoes coming back that were lost in full or partial in the Republic of Ireland. I think Alistair has already alluded to, you know, there are goods origin destination in Northern Ireland that currently travel as point of entry exit is currently Dublin port. So, you know, we'll have to get geared up for if there are customs procedures to be put in place, you know, and customers decide to get from goods, particularly from Northern Ireland to GB, they're going to use Northern Irish ports. We have to get geared up for that. So that's a positive as well. I would say the port has also invested heavily in recent years on new cranes and new forklifts and combi lifts. So we do have a flexible, experienced workforce who are used to handling all types of cargoes, ro-ro, containers, bulk, break bulk, project cargoes. So we do have the expertise in place. And I suppose the final point in general I would just make it is that, you know, and I think Seamus alluded to it earlier, is that there should be an opportunity for businesses who are located in Northern Ireland to access both the EU and GB markets, free from customs or tariffs. And surely that's an opportunity for businesses to be located in Northern Ireland.
Okay, Kieran, on that positive note, I will maybe call your contribution in then and move on to the panel session. And I'm going to now start putting the questions that you have forwarded in by email to the panel. I'm happy for the panel to chip in as appropriate. I'm just going to take them in the order that I have them here. And the first one is, with the movements of goods originating from GB but travelling to Northern Ireland via ROI, will it follow a different procedure? I'm not absolute, unless you want to pick that one up, Seamus.
At the moment, I suppose what we're hearing is an import declaration would be required upon arrival into Dublin, plus an export entry, let's say at Holyhead or at Liverpool. To get round that, really the only way to get round that, to ensure if you're trying to say the goods are going to Northern Ireland, is to move under the rules of transit. The problem with the rules of transit is that you need an office of transit at, say, Dublin Port, and then you need an office of transit, let's say, at the border at Ravensdale there, or Dundalk. And that probably goes against removing friction, obviously, on the land border and infrastructure, and it would create a lot of admin as well. So it's a bit of it's an area that still needs to be clarified and agreed. There is the special joint committee who are tasked with these things, these little unique things that we have with regards to the Northern Ireland Protocol. So it hasn't been really finalised what the procedure would be. I know there's a lot of concern with the GB ports that are trading with Dublin, just because they want to make it as easy as possible. We would like to see, like I spoke to the meat sector recently, and 50% of the meat that's processed in Northern Ireland on refrigerated units is going out via Dublin, just to get into that Southern English market. And the concern is that they want to make sure when they arrive into GB that it's as quick as possible rolling off the ferry and down the road, because it's ferry time sensitive loads. So that, unfortunately, there's no definitive answer that we have yet, but it is something being looked at by the Irish and the EU.
Alistair, yes, I think you want to contribute on that.
Yeah, I think sometimes we can get a bit lost in all the different ways of moving stuff and all the different kind of forms and jurisdictions and whatever. The most important thing customers need to get their heads around is this is a data problem. Whatever declaration you're trying to make, whether it be into Northern Ireland, into GB, whatever it might be, it's all about data and where that data is. And most of the data already exists, but what you really have to focus on is how you're going to get that data. So to make a customs declaration, you've got to know what the customs code for those goods are, how many kilograms there are, how many packages there are, how it's packaged. You don't probably have that as a haulier, but the manufacturer of the goods has probably got that. As a haulier, you probably know what trailer it's going on and what the registration is and what the driver's name is. And you've probably got the link into the ferry company in terms of the ferry company who know what ship it's going on and what the IMO number of that ship is and what sailing time is. And it's all about gathering these bits of data and getting them into one place. And that may be you as the haulier doing it, maybe the manufacturer doing it, maybe the importer doing it, it may be a mixture of everyone. But rather than getting too hung up right now on exactly which form do I fill and exactly how's it done, I'd first of all concentrate on how are you going to get the data? How are you going to get the data about that particular load? And don't forget, for a groupage trailer, for a trailer with more than one commodity on it, if there's a groupage load with 30 commodities on it, you need to do 30 customs declarations and 30 safety and security declarations. They will all then go under one envelope number, one single reference number, but beneath that, there'd have to be 30 declarations for customs and 30 safety and security declarations. So, and each of those declarations is probably 30 to 40 pieces of data. So, this isn't something people are going to do by emailing details through. It's all about how you get electronically linked with your customers and how you get electronically linked with the ferry operators. And I would urge anyone that isn't electronically linked to their ferry operator of choice or ferry operators of choice to get those links set up, because you're going to need to transfer that number into the ferry company. but you're also going to need to set up better links with your customers to transfer that information about the commodities that you probably don't have as a haulier at the moment. So, you know, I'd really focus on the data and the electronic links. Exactly what needs to be filled in and how it's done is almost, that can be sorted, but it's how you get the data in the first place, I think, is the key issue.
That's a very, very important point, and hopefully a learning from today's session, the importance of the data flows. You can start looking at that at the moment. You don't need to know the full extent of what the deal might be, but you do need to understand where all your different pieces of data are. And as you say, establishing those electronic needs that you're going to, links that you're going to need from the 1st of January. If we could maybe move on to the next question, Seamus, this is probably for yourself. It's about the trader support service, and you know, where can we find information about it at the moment so that people can read up on it and get a better understanding of how it might work?
The trader support service, there isn't, because each potential solution was bespoke. There were certain criteria the TSS had to adhere to, but each of the solutions, I spoke to some of the various different consortiums who were bidding for it, and they each had different ideas how it would look like. When it is formally announced, hopefully by the end of this week, we will then have an idea what the service will look like. That the consortium that has won this is going to have to hit the ground extremely fast. Within a couple of weeks, we will see them. They're going to have to engage with industry, and that's the concern. You know, I did speak. There were several consortiums in for it. I spoke to one of the consortiums that was unsuccessful, and one of the people in it actually breathed a sigh of relief, because they were like, "This is a hell of a workload to get through in 16 weeks." Because they're going to have to get out there. They're going to have to see face-to-face to businesses. They're going to have to set up almost, there'll be like a call center, a helpline. There'll have to be a website. And then there's going to have to be basically probably a lot of road shows around Northern Ireland, things like this. But then fundamentally, it's making sure that they have the expertise, the skilled staff to advise businesses and obviously then complete a lot of these declarations. And as Alistair says there, it's all about getting data. I think the concern at the moment, there's a lot of companies out there, manufacturers, who just think, you know what, we're just going to leave this all to our haulier, our logistics provider, to sort this out. But that's not the case. You know, we're simply the carrier. That data has to be given to the carrier to enable them the references, the appropriate references for shipping to be completed. So it's a real partnership, and as Alistair says, it's about just making sure the IT systems are in place. It probably goes back to the TSS funding. We've got that £155 million that's going to be available for businesses to basically improve their IT systems going forward, and we'll probably know more about that in the weeks and months ahead. But right now, the only information we have on the TSS is on HMRC's website. They give an overview of what it's going to do, but there's actually no detail just yet. That's that key thing. It's that thing we keep hammering at today. It's clarity. We need the clarity, and the sooner we get the fine detail of what the service will look like, the better.
Yeah, clarity is important, but I suppose what you and Alistair have said, it's important to understand your own relationships, the organisations that you need to work with, your customers, the ferry companies, everyone that help you deliver that load to your customers. It's important that you map all that out at the moment and at least have that done, so when work starts to come out on the scheme then, or the new service, then at least you'll be halfway there in terms of your own data.
Yeah.
I have another question here, and I apologize, Seamus, but maybe Alistair or Kieran might come in. It's maybe a little bit technical. It's then asking about the trader service and how will this affect the LCL movements across the Irish Sea? Whether that means anything to anyone. You can see that question there emailed in.
I think Alistair kind of answered that in the last when he was talking there. I think, you know, obviously LCL, one goods movement reference per consignment. So if you have 20 pallets in a trailer for 20 different consignments, that's the number of entries. I think the real concern that we have at the moment, I spoke to one courier company. This is where it gets really complicated. There's one large courier company that moves 6 trailers a day into Northern Ireland. On each trailer, there's around about 5,000 separate consignments. So there's 30,000 consignments a day. That's not practical or feasible to have to do an entry for that. And I suppose what we're seeing in the news this week about the Internal Markets Bill, I think with the government, we're seeing some negotiations happening on the back of this, and what they're looking to ease is certain trade flows into Northern Ireland. So retail and parcels, if we can ease that, get some derogations on that. Around about 65% of the value of freight that comes in here is for the retail and wholesale. So it's about, you know, that movement that leaves a supermarket warehouse in England and coming to their warehouse in Northern Ireland for their stores here. It's about making that as simplified as possible. But also as well, it's the internet, you know, the Amazon, you know, the Yodel, the Hermes parcels that people do the internet shopping on. It's about making that as streamlined as possible. So what we're trying to press the EU and the UK to agree on is a simplified, a kind of a trusted trader scheme, where these vehicles, when they come in, rather than having to consign those 5,000 different parcels into 5,000 different consignments, you simply consign them to the parcel company in Northern Ireland, and then from there they assure the EU that basically those goods entering the Republic of Ireland.
Could I maybe move on to the next question and maybe kick off with yourself, Kieran? And it's really about blockages at ports. The question is about queues at Dover and Felixstowe and English GB ports. And indeed, there was a piece in the Guardian this morning about a report Downing Street had got about 7,000 vehicles being blocked in a queue at Dover. But more locally, bringing it back to a local angle, do you see any particular issues or view contingency arrangements here locally for that?
Well, I suppose, first of all, our understanding is, I suppose, if the goods aren't cleared to get on the ship, they won't, you know, coming from Heysham or Bristol to go into Warrenpoint, if the documentation of the customs or the paperwork isn't there, they won't actually get on the ship. So hopefully anything that is on a ship and is on its way to Warrenpoint already has its paperwork in place, and that therefore should minimise any traffic jams or queues outside the port. We accept that for particularly all the unitised cargo that's coming in from GB into Warrenpoint, a certain percentage of those will have to be physically checked, and I suppose that's why we've moved to try and create as much additional space inside the port footprint. We've created another 6 acres. We've added, they already alluded to, the trailer park space down at the far end of the port. So we've done everything we can to sort of mitigate against traffic building up outside the port. We have had various conversations with the council and PSA and I, and talking about, you know, parking on hard shoulders. But I suppose our current view is that everything that's coming into Warrenpoint will hopefully be pre-cleared. Therefore, that minimises the amount of sort of backlog or traffic jams that will be in place. From NI to GB, we are assuming that very little paperwork or little or no paperwork will be required. Therefore, you know, there should be very little that's stopped in terms of stuff exiting, goods exiting Warrenpoint going to GB.
There's a question, maybe Alistair, you could pick up on.
Yeah, I think the big issue with congestion is primarily on ships that have large numbers of driver accompanied units. So Dover being a good example, the Holyhead Dublin routes, the Cairn Ryan routes, for instance, where you put the ship's door down and immediately 100 trucks all want to drive off in a big line and come off. If at the front of that queue there's a mad customs official who decides to step in front of that vehicle and stop that vehicle, on those type of routes, that then backs up onto the ship and the discharge of the ship is affected. So, you know, I think the driver accompanied routes, there's maybe a bigger concern about congestion, not so much for loading, but for discharging the ship. And I think if you're going into a port that is already, at the best of times now, fairly congested, it will be more difficult again. So, you know, Belfast, Larne, Warrenpoint, thankfully don't have too many congestion issues right now. But Dublin Port, if you go to Dublin Port in the morning time, it can already be pretty busy at the best of times. if there's any kind of delay with the discharge of traffic, particularly in the morning when you've got two big Holyhead ships arriving, a Seatruck ship, a P&O ship, all arriving at the same time, that discharge delay causing shipping delays, that could be a concern, yeah. And I think out of all of the ports on the Irish Sea, I think it's Dublin that have clearly done the most work in terms of facilities. And you'd think that's great. That probably means there's going to be the fewest delays. I actually think that's going to be the opposite. I think the biggest issues are going to exist in Dublin port of all of the Irish Sea ports that exist at the moment, you know.
And just a question for you, Alistair, specifically again about Warrenpoint, about whether trailers shipped on the Warrenpoint Heysham route need to be there any earlier, or whether you think they're going to need to be there any earlier.
Well, if it all comes true as now, Warrenpoint and Heysham should really be no different to now. So should continue to be flexible in terms of sort of going from Warrenpoint to Heysham. I don't think our check-in will be the issue. It's Newry will continue to be the issue, and that's why we need the Southern Relief Road, but that's a separate issue. But coming from Heysham to Warrenpoint, yes, there will be potential delays on discharge. We discharge our unaccompanied traffic into the yard anyway. But then if you've got to take a foodstuff load for a foodstuff inspection, or your load doesn't match up for some reason and you've got to have a random customs check, there could be a delay there. That's going to be in the hands of the veterinary people, the customs people. It's not really going to be for us to decide on that. And it's going to work in different ways. In Dublin Port, the haulier is actually going to have to type in their reference number into an app, and that will give you a red, amber or green light. Greens means you can go. Orange means you have to go somewhere and wait, and red means you're directed towards a particular facility. So there might be something like that in Northern Ireland. It's not really clear yet, but going into Northern Ireland, there will be some delays. Coming out, there shouldn't be any, but the check-in bit, the verifying of the number, when you give us that number online and the unit comes in, that verification process takes a couple of seconds. So, and we've tested that already. So I don't really foresee that check-in is going to take much longer than it takes now, which we've also been working on quite hard, because if check-in is delayed, that's what causes the queues, and we don't want that.
Seamus, if I could maybe come back to yourself with a question about transit between EU and Northern Ireland. Someone is asking, is a comprehensive guarantee required? Was it always? And do you think there will be any impact on this area?
Yeah, the guarantee, that can be sometimes that the carrier, the haulier, may have to do that. Again, that's one of the things we're looking for. HMRC may actually say it's a given really for HMRC. Do they want to impose that on goods travelling to Northern Ireland?
Your line's breaking up there a wee bit, and maybe
you could understand they may request it on goods moving under transit that are going to the Republic of Ireland through GB.
Okay,
would they deem those goods coming to Northern Ireland via GB as a risk to the UK internal market? Because in essence, it's contradicting the internal market.
Okay, you were breaking up there a little bit, Seamus. I'll maybe move on and just ask a question about the Trader Support Service. Does that mean you don't need to use a customs agent for it?
That's
Seamus, we're having problems. Maybe Alistair, could you pick that one up?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit unclear whether you need a customs agent or not. If you were purely shipping into Northern Ireland and you had all the relevant data, going back to the data thing before, it's possible you could do the TSS without a customs agent, and then you can do your Northern Ireland GB bit because there's nothing needed. So if you're purely doing that, but I'm kind of aware that most people on the call will probably have links across the island of Ireland. There aren't many people that solely deal Northern Ireland GB, GB Northern Ireland. Most people also have links into Ireland and different markets. So as soon as you start talking about Ireland, then you are going to need some way of doing those customs declarations and safety and security declarations. And, you know, that probably will involve a customs agent. There are other systems out there if people need help. We've teamed up with a provider that can link in with our system quite easily. So that's a way of doing it. But, you know, yeah, you probably should be talking to a customs provider right now, unless you're purely dealing with NI, GB, GBNI, and you've got access to all of the data that you need to input into the TSS, but we don't know what that data actually is yet.
And another question.
It's worth adding as well, the TSS under the WTO rules initially was brought in and was going to deal with the GB and I trade, but that would be illegal under WTO. So the TSS will also do import declarations for third country imports. So if you're paying for customs for goods coming from China today, technically you can use the TSS from January. So yeah, it's each business's decision what they do if they want. I don't know
Seamus,
if you got all that.
Seamus, I'm having problems at my end picking you up, and I'm not sure.
Did you get all that, Colin?
I'm having problems picking you up. So I'll maybe move on to the next question. Maybe
so, Colin, just I think what it's summary. I think Seamus is saying you can also TSS will also cover any rest of world goods coming in, not just GBNI, because under WTO rules it was illegal just to deal with GBNI or NIGB. So that's an advantage of the TSS. It will deal with rest of world imports as well. And I suppose I just take the small opportunity to say there are, you know, there is also 80 million of grant out there available for if you require either IT training or even additional staff for customs related, and you don't have to be an intermediate to apply for that grant. And I think if you just, you know, again, if you just Google customs grants UK, PwC are running that grant award, and there is 30 million already spent, and it's just been at the end of July there another 50 million was announced. So it's worth maybe some of the people online following that if they're dealing in some customs declarations.
Thanks for that. And maybe you could answer a very quick question, Kieran, in terms of foodstuffs. Does it mean, you know, all raw materials, for example, potato seed, would that be subject to a check, do you think?
Yeah, I think understand there's a certain percentage, and the percentage is yet to be worked out, depending on whether there's no deal or a deal. But there will be a certain amount of, if it's agri-food based, there will a certain amount of those imports from GBN to NI will have to be physically checked. There's 100% documentation checked, but the TSS should take care of that aspect. But there will be a certain percent will have to be physically checked. So the trailer just won't be allowed to leave the port until there's been a physical check done.
Yeah, I'm conscious of the time and trying to get through all the questions here, and I'm going to be bringing 𝗣𝗘𝗔𝗡𝗟 McGuire on shortly, and she can also talk about the support that Intertrade provides. Just some of the questions I probably could answer are exit declarations required moving goods from NI to GB. Well, I suppose that's what the politics is about at the moment, and hopefully we'll see a resolution to that issue in the not too distant future. Next question, in regards to the check at ports, do any of the panel envisage checks on cargo trailers other than agri-food, for example, human trafficking, contraband, etc.? Well, I presume there'll always be normal customs, security, police checks on those sorts of contraband issues.
Can I just add one thing there?
Alistair, yeah.
Yeah, just to let people know, and it's kind of relevant, particularly in the kind of cross-border areas, that I think HMRC formed a bit of a view a couple of months ago that anyone in Ireland who chose to move their goods to Northern Ireland and then ship out through a Northern Irish port would clearly be trying to circumvent the rules, because effectively you can move from the south to the north with no checks. You can then get on a ferry with no checks, and HMRC were concerned that this would be a way to kind of get around the rules, if you like. And we've been trying to educate HMRC that actually geographically many people may choose to do that for perfectly normal geographic reasons. So if you're in Dundalk and you want to get to England, Warrenpoint is the closest port. If you're in Donegal and you want to get to Scotland, Larne is the closest port. You wouldn't go to Dublin, you wouldn't go to Rosslare. So I think HMRC had a bit of a view that anyone going Ireland to Northern Ireland and then shipping out through Larne, Belfast or Warrenpoint would be somehow trying to cheat the system. Whereas actually, you know, those movements happen today, they're completely valid, and it's still a little bit unclear how those movements are going to be dealt with, and we're still waiting for confirmation on that. And just another small point, in Ireland, things like empty trailers, you're bringing an empty trailer into Ireland, you'll still need to get a reference number for that empty trailer. Please don't think because there isn't cargo on it that you don't have to do some form of declaration. You'll still need that pre-boarding notification number in Ireland. So just a couple of points.
Thanks. One final question before I go to 𝗣𝗘𝗔𝗞𝗘𝗥𝗦. And this is about, will the TAD be applicable for both Northern Ireland and ROI, where it covers through GB but stays in EU, including NI? I don't know that anyone wants to pick that particular one up.
That is the answer. Yeah, I think still unclear, I think, is the answer.
Right, okay.
HMRC should call the only formalities that they see in their eyes goods leaving Northern Ireland bound for GB. If it's goods at duty suspended, if it's goods, let's say, coming from Donegal or County Louth, or if it's going under transit. So if you are moving a load out through Northern Irish port and it's going to the continent, then the transit document for that. That's more for the benefit of the goods arriving in the continent, so it shows the French or Dutch authorities those goods originated in Northern Ireland, hence they're single market goods.
Okay, Seamus, thanks for that. I'd now like to invite Deirdre Maguire from InterTrade to support us on our final part of this. InterTrade have been very strong supporters of businesses through the whole Brexit process, and have been supporting us in these series of webinars. We've heard a lot of good advice this afternoon, Deirdre. I mean, I suppose supply chain is an important area. Is that something that InterTrade can help with?
Yes, Colm, and first of all, thank you very much for all of the webinars. I think Newry Chamber needs to be commended on what they've done here, and fantastic speakers and really good content as well. And I definitely think this is going to really help businesses. I know you mentioned supply chain, but I suppose really there's two things in all of this. And if you're a business, you know, so you'll be saying, what do I need to do here? So first thing here is your supply chain, okay? And you can do this. You can do this yourself, or you can get support to do it. I'll talk about the support in a minute, but basically with your supply chain, first of all, you need to do is check the impact. So the impact on your supply, and then you need to look at the impact on your supplier's supply. And then also, and it summarizes kind of about the data and the interlinkage about the relationships as well. As an SME in a business, you have a responsibility to work with your logistics provider. And so that is providing them with the right information, the right data, to know your Incoterms, to know your terms of trade, and to ask your logistics provider, you know, what they need from you and what impact they think there will be on your particular goods. You know, is it going to impact your lead times, et cetera, et cetera. But a proper supply chain impact assessment will delve into the linkages in your particular business and where your trade and where your risks are in that chain. And I think when you do that as a business, then you will have a better picture about where you stand and then what kind of customs you need to do, where you need to do it. Obviously, you'll be registering for the TSS. If you're straightforward and you're lucky and you're cross-border, you won't have customs paperwork. But if you've got food and animal origin, then you win. So my summary really would be, I would start at the supply chain, check out where your risks are, and then engage with your suppliers and your logistics providers. And then in summary, very quickly, conscious of time as well, there are supports. So I know Kieran mentioned the PwC customs grant. I'd say definitely look at that when you think that you know that you need it. I would go for that. And then obviously InterTradeIreland have £2,000 worth of support, and they'll help you get in there and do your supply chain risk assessment. They'll also help you train your staff in customs if that's what you need. And, you know, I would be saying to businesses, you can do this yourself, but you can also seek support to do it. So not to be too phased about all of the negativity, not negativity, because the implications, I suppose, is the proper word for that, because there will be implications. And it's just sit down, map your supply chain, see where your risks are, and start to mitigate.
Thank you, 𝗣𝗘𝗓, and thank you for your support with these webinars over the last couple of weeks and the support that InterTrade have been providing for businesses. I've already asked 𝗣𝗘𝗓 this question in an earlier session, so I'll not ask her again, but I'll come back very quickly to our panelists for a quick answer, starting Seamus, deal or no deal?
I think there'll be a deal, yeah. There will be, there's too much to lose without one, despite the...
Alistair, same question.
Yeah, I think something will happen, but I think there are too many people sat on their hands thinking that will mean nothing happens. Whatever deal is done, there are still going to be implications to the RSC. You're still going to have to fill in more documents than you used to have to fill in, particularly for loads into Dublin. So I would urge people not to sit on their hands, turn the news off and just get on with getting those data sets together, linking up with their customers and linking up with the ferry companies.
Kieran?
A minimum deal done and then a lot to be worked out after.
I think I would probably be in the same view with that. I mean, thank you to the panel for this afternoon and to 𝗣𝗘𝗓. I mean, despite all the political uncertainty that's out there at the moment and the politicking that's going on, I think there's a couple of important lessons from this afternoon about things that you can do. The Trader Support Service, if you haven't already register for it, get your EORI number. Alistair made a very important point about the data flows and understanding your data flows and who you need to engage with so that you're ready as a business for the 1st of January. And in 𝗣𝗘𝗓's points about training support that's available, the customs grants, the Brexit vouchers from InterTrade, and the importance of understanding your supply chain. So there's things that you can do, and as one of the panelists said, try to switch off the politics and just concentrate on what you need to do as a business. And hopefully in the coming weeks, we will get more clarity around those questions that we still need some answers to. So from us, that's it for this afternoon. As a chamber, we've enjoyed hosting this afternoon's event. This is the final in the current series of webinars with InterTradeIreland. And as a chamber, we'll be looking forward to doing other webinars later in the autumn. We will be putting out a questionnaire this afternoon to get some ideas from yourselves as to the sorts of things you think we should be running that would be helpful to business. So if you could spend a little bit of time filling that questionnaire in, we'd really appreciate that. So on your behalf, can I thank Seamus, Alistair and Kieran for their valuable input this afternoon, and to 𝗣𝗘𝗓 for InterTradeIreland's support in helping us to get the information out to businesses over the last few weeks. And of course, a big thank you to everyone who joined us today. So thank you and good afternoon.